The new Republican Party did well in the 1856 presidential election, but the Democrat James Buchanan won. The states he won were mainly in the South, but he did have some success in the North. Age 64, from Pennsylvania, he had been chosen by the Democratic Party over the younger, more energetic, but more controversial, Stephen Douglas. Buchanan had a great deal of experience, both in Congress and in federal government. In his inaugural address of March 1857, he asserted that the territorial issue had been settled by means of popular sovereignty. As a result, he hoped that the slavery agitation of the past 20 years might now come to an end. He was quickly disappointed. The emerging notion of slave power, including Dred Scott 1857. Just 2 days after Buchanan's inauguration, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling on a case brought by a freed slave, Dred Scott. The president had hoped that the Supreme Court would settle the issue of slavery in the territories. However, this did not happen. The Dred Scott v. Sanford case took years to come to a conclusion and brought into play concepts of freedom, citizenship, ownership, states' rights, and ethnicity. Dred Scott had been born a slave in slave state Virginia, but was sold and moved to Free State, Illinois with a new owner. Following the owner's death, Scott was moved to slave state Missouri with the man's widow, Eliza Sanford. Scott, who had earlier tried to buy his freedom, made a legal case that residents in Illinois had freed him, since slavery did not exist in Illinois, and, having been free, he could not be returned to slavery. The case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. In the 1850s, it was accepted that the Supreme Court could review policies to decide whether they fitted with the Constitution. Presidents tried to appoint Supreme Court judges with political views similar to their own. In 1857, when the Dred Scott v. Sanford case reached it, 7 of the 9 judges had been appointed by Democratic presidents, and 5 of them were from the South. The Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court was Roger Taney, from Slave State, Maryland, appointed by Southern Democrat President Andrew Jackson. In announcing the court's majority judgments on the case, Taney posed the key question: can a Negro, whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves, become a member of the political community formed and brought into existence by the Constitution of the United States? The court's answer was, an African American could not be an American citizen. Dred Scott had no right to bring his case to court. Slave owners could take their slaves anywhere governed by U.S. federal law. Congress had no authority to restrict the rights given to people by the Constitution. The court's judgments in the case were not unanimous. The split was 7-2. The majority consisted mainly of judges from the South. The 2 judges who did not agree were from the North. The Supreme Court thus overturned the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the popular sovereignty concept of the 1850s, the work of politicians over 40 years. According to the Supreme Court, there could be no limits on the constitutional right of individuals to transport property, including chattel slaves, anywhere in the USA. In the struggle between the sections, the South had won. It was not just the judgments which angered the North, however. Many Republicans believed that the way that the judgments were reached was itself unjust, and that there had been a conspiracy involving the new Democrat President Buchanan and Chief Justice Taney. The Dred Scott rulings were announced 2 days into the Buchanan presidency. This was seen by them as evidence of growing slave power, especially as 5 of the judges were from slave states.